Welcome everyone to today's show and tell for supporting a just energy transition. So I'll do a quick introduction into the challenge. Next slide, please. So today's projects relate to the theme of supporting consumers in vulnerable situations. Consumer vulnerability is particularly important as we make the journey into net zero so that no consumers are left behind or fall into fuel poverty. Consumers in vulnerable situations are not limited to those on the priority service register at present. So as we transition away from fossil fuels, it will be increasingly important to innovate to try and support the decarbonisation of heat and mobility for rural, off-gas grid, fuel poor, and those consumer groups with reduced access to opportunities for decarbonisation. So today you'll hear from a range of projects which are aiming to meet this challenge and create better outcomes for these vulnerable consumers. So our agenda for today, first off, we will have Hyphair. These are 15-minute presentations followed by a 5-minute Q&A. So Hyphair is led by SGN. This will follow, Vivid will follow, and they are SSEN led. And then we'll have Net Zero Terrace, also followed by a Q&A and a 15-minute break. And then we will kick off the second half of the session with EV Respond, led by National Grid Electricity Distribution, and Guidelight, led by UK Power Networks. Finally, our last presentation is Shield, also led by UKPN, and then we'll have our final Q&A at 4:20, followed by a wrap up and finish at 4:30. So without further ado, I will hand over to our first presentation, SGN with Hyphair.
Hello everyone. This is Andy Ross from Centre for Energy Equality, and here to present the Hyphair project, which has been a collaborative project between SGN, Centre for Energy Equality, and Fife Council. Next slide, please. And next slide, please. So the initial challenge we have been looking to address with this project is that the transition to hydrogen and other ways to get to net zero will present different challenges to different people and small businesses, dependent on their perspective. And those challenges start now, really, before the transition commences, and will continue to present challenges that are unique to different people during and following any particular transitions. So we've had a particular focus in this project on consumers in vulnerable situations, so whether that may be people with limited financial resources, people living with different health conditions or disabilities, or living with or small businesses who may be particularly vulnerable and haven't been included so much historically in transitions, unlike larger businesses who have got sustainability officers and people focused on that as their day job. And so some of the challenges that we expected to hear preemptively before going into the project are sort of listed in those questions on the screen. So concerns about affordability, safety, whether existing supply chains and tradespeople are going to be able to keep up with demand. Is billing going to change, and all these types of things. So these are all challenges that we've been seeking to address and try to come up with solutions for. The next slide, please. Of course, this is a TIF funded discovery project, and these are the work packages that I'll be talking about. So we started off looking at geographical and demographic factors, as well as conducting a literature review. We then moved forward and engaged with a group of vulnerable energy consumers through panel sessions, and also through direct interviews with the local authority, different departments and small businesses, including in relation to supply chain. And then we took all that information to try and come up with some solutions, which we'll come on to later in the presentations, and costed all that up to see if doing something about this is going to be beneficial. Next slide, please. So yeah, just taking each work package one by one. So we initially conducted a demographic analysis looking at data supplied by SGN on vulnerability in SGN's regions in Scotland and down the south of England as well. And some of the things we found was actually typically people with low income also have relatively poor quality housing in terms of their EPC ratings, for example, which could be indicative of an area that needs further support. We came up with a series of maps, as you can see on the screen, highlighting areas that may need particular support, focusing in and around where areas are likely to transition to hydrogen first, including around Fife, and liaising with the H100 project, which is a project looking to demonstrate a conversion to hydrogen in the Fife area. Concluded that this type of work can be really beneficial in overall planning and is something that could be progressed to later stages. Next slide, please. We conducted a detailed literature review because, of course, there has been a lot of work to help address the challenges associated with vulnerability in context of changing energy sources. And we also looked at different behavioural theories around change, because change isn't generally taken lightly by people. So looking at the best ways to support people during a transition to hydrogen or other sources of clean energy. And we produced a literature review which will feature in our end of project reporting. Next slide, please. And in work package 2, we engaged a group of consumers in vulnerable situations on a couple of panel sessions where we wanted input into the energy transition. And these are some of the key insights that we found. So as mentioned, forced change is not taken lightly. So people like to be able to input and have choice. And people don't like to consider one transition type, hydrogen or other sources, in isolation, and like to have choice and feed into the solutions. People are concerned about safety, people are concerned about cost, as you can imagine. And then there's some unique situations where people, for example, we spoke to one person who had decking around their house for access and was very concerned about what conversion, new pipes, these types of things would mean for that decking. Would it all have to be ripped up? Who's going to do that? Do I need to leave my home? And things like that. So there's lots of different challenges that people are concerned about experiencing during a transition to clean energy. Next slide, please. And similarly, we spoke to a number of small businesses, the community, and different departments in local authorities. And actually, the challenges are fairly similar that those organisations are likely to experience. So concerns around affordability, concerns about financing. So we spoke to a restaurateur, for example, who was concerned about the cost of converting all of his appliances in his hotels. Are there going to be incentives? How do I engage with those incentives? What financing, as I say, mechanisms are available? And then we spoke to industry and plumbers, for example, who were concerned about how they should be retraining and reskilling their staff. Because there's lots of different potential options in the future. So, some of the concerns that we had. Next slide, please. So we took all of that information that we gathered from that research and started looking at developing solutions. So, synthesized all of that information and categorized what we'd heard into a series of risks, as you can see in the sort of middle column there. Not expecting you to read those, and then we looked at those risks and thought about which of those risks are being addressed already or naturally or don't need any innovation to be addressed. And then from that, we identified a number of gaps. And then we came up with several solutions and areas that could influence and benefit and fill those gaps before down selecting a solution, bearing in mind this is quite broad, that we think could help address lots of those gaps. Next slide, please. So again, won't go into this in a lot of detail, but in the circles there's a sort of different solution areas. So yeah, we need solutions around local supply chain, financial assistance, need to collect better data, communication needs to be really effective, customer services need to be upskilled and involved, and there's a lot of engineering and network challenges that need to be addressed. And what we found is that what we're proposing is to develop something called a Fairer Warmth Hub that can tackle lots of these challenges. And I'll talk about that a bit more in the next slide, please. So yes, this is the Fairer Warmth Hub. So this is the solution we're proposing to develop. So this is an overarching solution that we landed on, and would see the creation of the Fairer Warmth Hub and a series of tools, which would be a go-to place for households, people supporting those households like community groups, community champions, and then organisations who are also involved in that transition to help enable a clustered community-led approach for delivering net zero pathways based on what the likely pathway in that area may be, whether that be hydrogen or another form of low carbon heating. And some of the specific tools that we would look to develop are a central hub for collaboration and information sharing, an app which would build on Centre for Energy Equality's existing Fairer Warmth app, which would help with personal energy advice, a central system, training system and platform that community champions can upskill themselves, working closely with community groups, because the solutions need to be place-based, and every place is going to have different people and a different view of what the transition is like there. So each area needs community champions who can help with communication, help people, particularly people in vulnerable circumstances, upskill, obtain the grants they need to improve their homes and be able to save energy costs and adapt to these changes. And then finally, information from those systems would feed into an organisational area where the GDNs, DNOs and other energy organisations involved in the energy transition, like local authorities, can plan that place-based transition to net zero using a demographic tool and a pathways tool, which we're specifying at the moment. Next slide, please. And hopefully this solution will deliver a range of benefits. So we'll provide clear, useful information that people need when they're transitioning to a low carbon solution that can help people access grants, access support they need, signpost to wider support, because transitioning to net zero is part of everybody's other life challenges. So how does it tie in there? And then from an organisational perspective, we can share best practice, which will help reduce inefficiencies in the transition to net zero nationwide. Next slide, please. Yes, and finally, so this is our proposed approach in the next phase of the project. So we want to develop the hub and the tools that we've just talked about. We want to, of course, continue to make the solution fit for purpose for everybody. So continue with consumer engagement, stakeholder engagement, testing, making sure the solutions that we develop work for everybody. So, for example, mitigating the impact of digital exclusion, for example. We need to make it work on an enduring basis, so develop the right operating model and gather more data that will feed into the hub. before setting up a series of trials, including a trial that's based around the Fife area, continuing to work with our local partners and community groups more widely. And I think that's the last slide. Next slide, please, just to check. Yeah, thank you. Any questions?
Thanks. So we'll just go to Q&A now. So first question, did you engage with the public sector to look at their requirements and the potential health and wellbeing impacts of fuel poverty? Does the Fair Warmth Hub align with the Energy System Catapult's warm home prescription?
Yes. So one of the lead partners of the project was Fife Council, and Centre for Energy Equality also work more widely with local authorities on these challenges. But we spoke to the housing, several housing officers within Fife Council, as well as the sustainability lead team. I think a couple are on the call at the moment. And we talked a lot about the challenges that people are experiencing and some of the needs that they have. So one of the key things that we want to build into the solution is being able to get grant funding, the funding that is available to the right people, so that people's homes are fit and ready for a potential transition, which could result in higher energy bills potentially. And in terms of the warm homes prescription, we have actually, the Energy Systems Catapult have been helping us with user feedback from one of the apps that we're proposing to develop, and they have also, we did speak about the warm homes prescriptions, and certainly these tools for the warm homes prescription methodology, where doctor surgeries and people are able to prescribe warmth for problems such as respiratory conditions that are exacerbated by cold homes, would definitely be taken into account, and be keen to collaborate around that. Great,
thanks for that. Next question, is this approach for ideas where hydrogen has been shown to be the best viable heat decarbonisation pathway? How do this evaluated, it says, but I think how is this evaluated is the question.
So I think where we're trying to get to with the Fair Warmth Hub is to have a solution that can create a sort of clustered approach and provide pathways for any type of, so it's kind of agnostic of the solution in many ways. Because I mean, from organisations' perspective, it's I think different solutions are going to be suited to different areas based on the demographics and the geography. But the idea is to develop the solution such that it will be useful for any type of transition, but including focusing on making it work around a project in Fife, which is demonstrating a transition to hydrogen, but equally, and we're keen to engage with other energy vectors in the project moving forward to make it work in those situations as well.
Okay. How have you engaged as a diverse customer base through your research? Have you found that the different solutions are more attractive or better suited to different demographics?
Yeah. So with this project, we've been particularly focused on customers in vulnerable situations through our panel sessions. So this is people with living in with particular challenges associated with decarbonisation, such as health conditions or such as having limited resources or caring responsibilities. And what we've found at Centre for Energy Equality is if we can design solutions for the people who are hardest to reach and hardest to engage in these challenges, then generally with the solutions are likely to work more widely. So yeah, that's been our main focus, as well as with small businesses. And when I talk about small businesses, this is businesses who are sort of high street shops, restaurants, and then also the supply chain, so plumbers, electricians, these types of organisations, small organisations, because I think to date our research has shown there hasn't been so much engagement with those types of organisations as opposed to big manufacturing plants that need a specific solution, massive investment and that type of thing. So businesses that are part of the community we've engaged with who experience similar challenges.
Right. I believe that's the last of the questions. Thank you for answering those, Andrew. The Q&A function will stay open for a little bit if anyone else has any further questions that come to them. But we're running a bit ahead of schedule, but we will move on to Vivid.
Hello, thank you. Yep, I'm Simon O'Loughlin. I'm project manager from Scottish and Southern Electricity Networks, and I've been managing the Vivid project. It stands for Vulnerability Identification via Informative Data. We all love an acronym. And on the next screen, you'll be able to see the participants. So we've got Quarriers, one of Scotland's largest charities representing the third sector, Aberdeen City Council, Scotland's third largest city, CGI, represented by Fiona Fulton, who's on the call, and SSEN. And you'll be able to see, if you on the next slide, you'll see all of the people that are taking part, have taken part in it. Predominantly people from data protection, right up to director level, but we've also had customer service people. We've been able to get project managers and a lot of IT and legal experts as well. So on the next slide, I've got 1 minute to tell you what we're seeking to address. And this next slide covers it off in one sentence. We've been able to, we all know that we should be sharing data far more widely and efficiently to help people that are in vulnerable situations. We should be doing it more quickly, more efficiently, and that's exactly what Vivid is aiming to do, and do so in a really secure manner. I'll keep it moving along because we have got very limited time and lots to say. This project being incredibly exciting to be a part of, and there's been so much work done and so much more to do. So you'll see here we've got the retrospective view of a deeper dive of what we're looking to address, including the untapped benefit of smart meters, bridging the digital divide, making sure that when we say no household will be left behind, we've actually got the tools to be able to make sure that we can look at every single household and community and put in place tools that will keep them up to speed with digitalisation, as well as with low carbon technologies and some of the more fundamental things of making sure that we can close the PSR gap and that local authorities can have a richer risk record with more up-to-date details. So no mean feat and a lot to do. And I'll pass you over now to Fiona Fulton, who's going to describe in a little bit more detail how we intend to do that.
Thanks, Simon. If we could move on to the next slide, please. So the original SIF project brought together two ideas from CGI and Quarriers. CGI's perspective was around the use of smart meters. Quarriers was looking to leverage some experience they've had elsewhere, looking to bridge the digital divide. So what we've actually done with the project is looked at how we can bring the use of information and the kind of digital engagement pieces together in order to create one coherent project. So if we can move to the next slide, please. So really what we did with Vivid is when we sat down to brainstorm the ideas, it became clear that while there's still a wealth of information around our vulnerable customers within each of the partners and probably within each region, we're still working very much in a data silo. Despite everyone's best endeavors, we haven't really brought together a single reference for vulnerability in this area, in this example, we're looking at Aberdeen City, so there's no single reference, for example, for Aberdeen City for vulnerability. So one of the things that we decided that we would need to look to address in a secure manner was how we could maybe bring together all that information. And this is not just the priority services register, this is all the information between all of the different partners, how we could bring that into a consolidated reference set, and link to that how we could try and coordinate the engagement and treatment of vulnerable customers across the board for that region. So those are two of the key premises of what we're trying to do with Vivid. And once we've done that bringing together of information, what we're then looking to do is go deeper into the analysis and bring in the use of smart meters to add an element of proactivity and near real-time analysis to look at how customers are being impacted, how we can help them, how we can make that information more timely. And just looking to that piece on the end there, where we're talking about customers in vulnerable situations, between all the partners, as you've seen, going across local authorities and charities, network operations, IT specialists, we've got a range of views about customers, and we've been able to bring all of that understanding together, and we've tried to make this everything really very targeted to the end customer and not about the technology. So all of these key premises have been brought together in some very specific use cases, which I could talk about on the next slide, please. So as you can see, when we sat down, we came up with quite a lot of use cases where we felt that we could improve the way that we're able to manage and help vulnerable customers. There are too many to do in an alpha phase project, so we've prioritized them. As you can see, the top three I'll talk in a little bit more detail, as those are the ones that we're going to focus on in the alpha phase. But there's a lot of other very important areas which are both kind of stretch goals in alpha. So energy efficiency, we know will cover across all use cases and needs to be addressed, but it's such a big area, it probably needs some specific activity that's larger than alpha. Warm home prescriptions already been mentioned, and that's something on our list as well. But again, we're looking to do that potentially in a future phase, and we're trying to keep the alpha phase very specific in order to investigate how we can run those top three use cases. So I'll explain those three use cases in alpha in a little bit more detail. So if we could go to the next slide, please. So as I mentioned, we understood the area of data silos and still working with incomplete vulnerable information. So a large part of what we propose to do in alpha is looking at how we can combine, but also importantly, desensitize a lot of the vulnerability information that's held across the board in each of the regions, bring that into a central reference set of data. It's important here that what we're looking at is how we can do that in a kind of efficient and operable manner, with it one eye on business as usual and a federated solution that could support whole of GB in the future. So a lot of our time here is going to be looking at, you know, the areas of data privacy, consent management, all of those things. We've investigated, you know, the principles of what we need to do in discovery. What we want to do in alpha is basically take those into execution and make sure that we're able to operate those effectively in the way that we hope. And this forms a real baseline for all the other use cases that we hope to do within Vivid. This gives us the data baseline, consistent data baseline to kind of run everything else. So if you can move to the next slide, please. So one of the first use cases will then run on that common vulnerability information data set that we create. We'll be looking at bridging the digital divide. That common data set will give us an indication of, you know, all the known vulnerable people within the Aberdeen area, but it'll also help us identify those that have and have not got smart meters. And that will allow us to then look at how we engage with those customers, those that may be digitally excluded. As we all know, the most vulnerable are often the least likely to engage with technology. So this use case will be very much focusing on if we know who those people are who haven't engaged with smart metering or haven't engaged with technology, can we go and engage with them, and looking at the different methods that we can use to do that. And go to the next slide, please. So the third use case is kind of showing the other half of the project. So I guess if we said one half was about, the digital divide and better engagement, this half is more about, deep dive into looking at the smart meter information and the other data sets that we've got. So having created a known baseline of vulnerable customers, what we will look to do is then using those kind of known customers as the baseline, we'll look at patterns of behavior with smart meters, look at patterns of demographics, and try to start finding the missing vulnerable. So those that we know need help, but we don't know who they are yet. They haven't been listed on anyone's system and they're missing out. So we're looking at a way of proactively being able to try and identify those people on an ongoing basis. Okay, I think that's next slide and possibly back to Simon.
Thank you very much, Fiona. Yes, unfortunately, we were going to have Katie Martin from Quarriers and Martin from Aberdeen City Council doing the next two slides, saying about how their involvement has been so exciting for them and their colleagues, but also how it can work into Vivid. One of them's had a family emergency and the other one's struggling with Zoom being firewalled. So I'll do my very best to convey what they wanted to say. And I think it is fair to say that they've been fully participating in every single part of the project. We've been able to have a face-to-face meeting in Aberdeen with all of us together, where we did a lot of the brainstorming work, and we're able to break down a lot of the barriers and silos between local authorities, the third sector, and the energy industry, which was really, really interesting afternoon that we had on there. And from a Quarriers perspective, they are a big property owner in Scotland. They work with a lot of the local authorities already, everything from helping people with drug and alcohol issues to carers, young carers, people with mental ill health, with physical disabilities. And it's the carers and young carers sector that they work very closely with Aberdeen City Council already. We also work with them as a DNO perspective on resilience planning and PSR promotion. So they're a really, really good charity and have been a fantastic partner. And they're looking to embed this into their inclusion and decision-making process. They will be able to feed in the anonymized and desensitized details of people they're already supporting, share it at the right level for PSR purposes, and also with the local authority where they've already got people that they're working with to help. So a lot of alpha will be finding out the exact threshold of that data sharing and GDPR requirements. But suffice to say that they already have compliance and are able to consent is the word I'm looking for, consent to be able to help these individuals. So any additional information they get will be able to make them work more efficiently, better targeted, give a greater amount of support to people who so desperately need additional help, support, funding, energy efficiency, and all of the things that we know we can offer once Project Vivid is in full flight. On the next slide, Martin's a man of few words, but wanted to get across how well, and I think the big surprise was just how well all of this fitted together with Aberdeen City Council's anti-poverty strategy, and how they're helping people who they already know, again, are in rent arrears, or people who are living in cold, damp housing, and people who need additional support, potentially during crisis situations. So not just the day-to-day, but fire, flood, building collapse, anything out of the ordinary crisis situations that we all know can happen over and above power cuts. Martin actually is the head of their early intervention team. So the way that Martin's coming at this project is being able to see how Vivid will be able to help him intervene earlier for people before they get into dire straits, before they can get into extreme fuel poverty, and before they suffer real bad poverty and depravity. And they've been building an tenancy intelligence model, a TIM called TIM, and that will also be able to feed data into Vivid again, at the right level and be able to take useful information out of it to fine-tune their tenancy information management and be able to help people who are tenants for Aberdeen City Council in far greater ways. And of course, as a council, they already have outreach there to be able to engage with people, and they'll be able to work more closely with, we've had Shona Horn, who is our customer resilience manager and customer relations manager in the area, and we'll be able to work far closer with Aberdeen City Council as a result. I know we're getting short for time now, but if we skirt through the last few slides, this was something that I was hoping Martin and Kate would be able to wax lyrical about, because it's been so good finding all the shared goals. I won't read all of those, but making sure that, and the key thing is that we've realized it's not so much a data project as a people project. And all of us have been able to focus on the end in mind of helping those most vulnerable within society. And the other thing, the second to last one there, that the process is replicable. And the local authority, Aberdeen City Council, can see how it would work in other local authorities. And quarriers are already building their side of things to be replicable with other charities and third sector. So moving on, we've got slide 14, and the next one, please. Quick look ahead is you'll recognise this from up front with what we're seeking to address. And if you do just one click, please, the only animation in the slide deck should slide in and show us exactly what we're planning to do to be able to counter all of those issues that we identified up front. Making sure that we're tying in with existing projects, Smart and Fair Home Flex being two of them, and also really getting precisely targeted help to the people who need it most. As we're running out of time, that's there for you to refer back to if you need. But the next slide quickly shows us the really exciting benefits that are there for customers in vulnerable situations, from expanding the PSR, in our instance, from 770,000 at the end of 2021 up to over 1 million people. That's our Scottish and our central southern areas by the end of Vivid. And if we go to all the figures are there for you to refer back to, but I want to keep us on time and share the news. I was excited as that lady there when we got UK Power Networks wanting to look at the next steps for how it could be replicable in London, all but the 3 areas that we represent, and the southeast. DCC are going to come in with their wealth of knowledge from supply data and their smart data to be able to back up what CGI have already got planned, and E.ON as a supply partner for Alpha 2. And very quickly on the next slide, you will see that we've got really well-defined work packages already for Alpha to be able to make sure that everything is done in a very methodical way that leads to successful outcome in work package 8, with an expansion feasibility study providing measurable benefits. Sorry if I'm 2 minutes over, but ready to take any questions you have for us.
Thanks, Simon. A couple of questions here. Who are the business owners in ECC who ultimately own and use this tool?
The ultimate owners will be, from an innovation perspective, the Future Networks team will be able to make sure that Vivid is successful and embedded into the business. The areas that we are consulting on internally at the moment, as well as the smart meter, data and IT teams and data protection and legal, are the business consumer vulnerability area, and also the connections teams. So we're already exploring channels where we'll be able to link in with finding the PSR customers, engaging with them properly via the customer relationship management teams like Shona Horn in the Grampian region, but also other teams that are needing to find customers that they can help on a day-to-day basis with power cuts for PSR, but also during crisis situations to be able to help and provide support on the ground.
Right, next question. Would NHS Grampian not be a critical partner to help identify vulnerable people?
They are, thank you for that question. And we've been liaising with Martin Allen from Grampian NHS. In fact, the use case that Fiona had on that big slide where there was the 7 use cases was looking at prescribing warmth and linking in with a project they've already got in the Aberdeen and Aberdeenshire wider area of helping people via embedded data and monitoring tools that are within their homes. And it was actually because of that that the GDPR legal and data protection teams raised a red flag and said that that would delay discovery and alpha getting into those kind of areas where you've got monitoring tools in people's homes and you're bringing data in from there. It's too exciting not to do, but it's too risky to risk delaying the alpha by including that as a use case in alpha. So that's one that's going to happen in beta if we get that far, which I'm sure we will, because the benefits, as you just said, from including NHS Grampian will be huge, and they're wanting to participate, and we really want to take the project to that level. It is just a case of making sure that we do so in a safe, compliant, regulated and assured manner.
Great, thanks for that, Simon. I can't see any further questions here, but the chat function again will be open for a little bit longer. So the Q&A function, the chat function is, David's just pointed out, to please use the Q&A function. It makes it a bit easier to track up the question. So that Q&A function will be open for a little bit longer. But thanks very much for a very comprehensive presentation. On to our next presentation. Net Zero Terrace.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Helen Seagrave and I'm the Community Energy Manager at Electricity North West and the project lead for Net Zero Terrace. And I'm here with Phil Proctor from Borough Happel to talk to you about this project this afternoon. So the next slide shows to you the agenda for our presentation, but and also the partners in the project. So we've worked with Borough Happel, Rossendale Valley Energy, Rossendale Borough Council and Northern Power Grid as project partners, but we've also closely collaborated with the North West Net Zero Hub and the Centre for Energy Equality. And as you'll see, I'll talk through our headline messages, an overview of the work packages and what our next steps are. So the next slide sort of sets out the problem in a nutshell. We have addressed the innovation challenge that we're all here to talk about, supporting a just energy transition, but specifically how to involve people that might otherwise get left behind with the decarbonisation of heat. So the problem that we're looking to address is one that's faced by many terraced homes with limited outdoor space, where you can't install an air source heat pump because there isn't the space and there's possibly noise constraints. So how do you bring those people and those homes along with the low carbon transition and get them involved with decarbonising their heat supplies? So the Net Zero Terrace street solution is a shared ground source heat loop, which will bring hot water to homes to a temperature that can then be stepped up within the homes by a small air source heat pump. We can offer that to all 10 years of homes. So this is a terrace street where it's not just social housing, it's social housing, private sector and private landlords and owner occupiers. The offer includes energy efficiency measures to make sure those heat pumps will work, and community owned energy solar to help bring down the price of energy towards those homes, because it's a combined solution. The next slide talks to you a little bit more detail about this, the project summary. So we're working, like I said, in Rossendale, which is in Lancashire, and particularly in a town called Bacup. That picture shows you the streets. That's our study area for this. This project was conceived and thought of by the community energy group there, Rossendale Valley Energy. And not only will it be relevant for this area, but there are more than 10 million terraced homes in the UK, and many of them will face the same constraints as identified by this community in Rossendale. And the picture, as you can see, shows you the space issues that are around these homes. The counterfactual is what what is on offer to these homes if they don't have this solution is an electric boiler, and that's what we're comparing within this project. And the innovation really is the combination of the technical solution, the financial offer, so it's one standing charge to the homeowners and the households, not just homeowners. It's integrated into the grid. It's not behind the meter or a microgrid or a private wire. It's on the DNO network, and there's a significant level of engagement and buy-in from the community. The next slide gives you the sort of the headline messages that we've got so far from our discovery phase. So the techno-economic modelling shows that this is the lowest cost option for delivering low carbon heat to homes like this. It's currently on a par with the sort of the do nothing option, which is retaining your gas boiler. And we think that once we improve the modelling, it will show we're competitive with that. It clearly will save carbon compared to keeping gas, but it also saves carbon compared to the counterfactual, which, as I mentioned, is the electric boilers. It is a technical solution that is possible. The innovation is around the integration, so it does require more work to de-risk and understand all parts of the components and how they will integrate together. It's possible to integrate it into the network under current regulatory regimes and provide that element of locally owned generation and local supply by using one of the computer platforms that are out there that will help us sort of reconcile charging the householders with locally produced energy to bring down the price to them all. The current connection regime can also deal with this project, so it can be integrated into our network, but it does miss some opportunities to maximise the benefits that the system can provide. So there's further work for us to do to look at how we can best integrate it into the network. And we've looked at engagement plans as part of the discovery phase and developed an extensive plan with a range of tools that can be tested further in alpha to see what will work. So the next slide starts to talk through the work programs that we've done as part of the discovery phase. I've already mentioned really the outcome of the regulatory review and the fact that it is possible under the current regulatory regime and we don't require any derogations. The next slide was also the next work package was also led by us at Electricity Northwest, and colleagues looked at how you can integrate it into the network and what the overall impact is on for requiring reinforcement and the connection costs. And you probably won't be surprised to hear that the ground source heat pump solution puts less demand onto the network compared to the counterfactual, and therefore is cheaper to connect. The next slide shows you the community energy strategy as developed by Rosendale Valley Community Energy, which focuses on reaching those people in the community that you need to reach to, engaging them in a meaningful way and retaining them through the lifetime of the project so that they are able to reach the point where they do want to sign up to the solution, they do want to have the energy efficiency measures that they're being offered, and they want to take part in the project. They've done an awful lot of work to develop a very comprehensive strategy, which will be tested fully during the alpha phase to see which are the best engagement methods. And now I'll hand over to Phil from Borough Happel, who can talk you through more of the systems architecture and the design.
Next slide, please. So one of the modules we looked at was to develop a spatial planning process to identify where the heat clusters would be applicable, and also to start working out a methodology to work in conjunction with ENWL and DNO in generic terms, in terms of capacity alignment and where flexibility would also play its part. So for this exercise and the discovery phase, we used the Rosendale boundary just to capture an idea of the extent of clusters that would benefit the Rosendale area. We came up with 14,000 households in Rosendale alone. There's a big concentration of terraced homes in the area. And when we used the mapping approach to then understand the extent of the heat clusters, we came up with approximately 300 kilometres of heat network that would be deployed on the back of this process, which is a key point to understand in conjunction with the heat zoning work that's going on at the moment in terms of focus on commercial 4th generation, 5th generation networks that might not be viable in areas like this due to relatively low heat density compared to what those networks typically require. But actually we have a mechanism for rolling out shared heating system at scale, which for areas like Rosendale could be very, very achievable. We also hone down in terms of that particular spatial planning process into then understanding the intricacies of individual clusters and areas. And so we brought the boundary area down to a particular cluster in Bacup and explored that and developed an approach for looking at where the local connection points are, working in conjunction with ENWL on grid impact as a result, and mapping and designing at the spatial context the scheme in terms of understanding where the rooftops would be to deploy solar PV, connecting that in where the heat network would be, potential areas for EV charging points, communal EV charging points, because there's no off-street parking, and then feeding information into ENWL to look at their network model and where there would be voltage rise issues or thermal issues, and what the potential impact on the network would be under different scenarios. The challenges and areas to look at next time are that scalability and also more automated process of DNO data in conjunction with the spatial planning process to start more quickly designing these clusters, but also to bring in the streetworks strategy as well, looking at existing utilities, areas for boreholes, and viability around some of those other aspects which require subscription into the modelling process. Next slide, please. In terms of the design review, we looked at a system architecture that would deliver this and the subsystems that would be required to do that as well. So we've identified a system architecture and been soft market testing that with providers as well. Basically, in a nutshell, we're looking at a novel model where community energy is brought together in terms of energy outside of the boundary area, but also energy within the boundary area on rooftops. That's aggregated rooftops on the terraced homes and other rooftops in nearby. For example, there's a good commercial building nearby the cluster we've been looking at. EV charging, the ground source heating array, and also then the design approach to integrating that as a single operating system and integrating that with ENWL system to exploit what could be quite a considerable amount of flexibility that could be delivered from that. So we need to then follow that up and look in more detail at the integration process. Also looking at a testing process to de-risk any risks of putting this into real people's homes in the early stages, and looking at more closely at the network management aspect, because it does require a change to the current way that the flexibility market mechanism works. Next slide, please. And as just touched on earlier, we have been soft market testing this, so we are confident the subsystems can all be provided on the market. What we're really interested in is the integration of that. That's commercial and technical integration. We've identified providers that we're looking to take through into the alpha stage. We've had NDA signed with Kenzie Utilities and an Urban Chain. We've been talking to the University of Salford about using controlled test facilities with them to test out some of the subsystem components as part of the de-risking strategy. And we've consulted with over 20 organisations that supply different elements of the system in terms of their potential interest in the scheme and what they can provide. And there's been very strong interest and good alignment with that. So building on that, next stage would be then to establish that test environment, to then start to look at the interfaces and to prove out some of this. This isn't about just also evaluating it in isolation on this project. What we're really keen on is cross-project learning. A lot of these organisations and other organisations have been testing different elements of what we've been talking about today in other projects or as part of their product development process. So it's about capturing that learning, not repeating it, but then looking at where there are little gaps that we can identify that we would want to take forward and de-risk. Is that it, Helen?
Yes, I can just talk through the final couple of work packages. So the local authority were a key project partners working closely with the community energy group, and their engagement plan is around how they can use their sort of existing channels and resources to amplify the message of the community energy group, but also align what they're trying to do with what the local authority is already delivering, especially around the provision of fuel poverty services and energy efficiency services. They're also quite a key partner for understanding the planning regulations that are required for installing solar panels and ground source heat pumps, and which authority it is we need to, the project needs to talk to. And then the next slide shows that we've also been working, Northern Power Grid are also a project on the partner. They've done a sort of a peer review, so looking at the low voltage, the connection study that my colleagues carried out to see what we've done to try and integrate it into the network, but also to compare how it works across the two DNOs. And we've discovered that there are slight differences in the processes for how projects like this are considered to be connected to our different networks. So the headlines are that projects like this can go ahead in both areas, but due to those slight differences, you might get slightly a different outcome on the connections process. So that gives us something to look at in further phases to see whether there needs to be some industry standardisation across those areas. And then I think the next slide takes us on to what our next steps are. So we want to go forward for an alpha phase application, and what we want to do is to sort of further test and develop the idea. So around that community engagement, that is taking that engagement plan that's been developed and looking at to test the various different engagement methods. So working with a new partner, the Centre for Energy Equality, looking at how the Fairer Warmth app compares as an engagement method compared to sort of more traditional methods, and how we can keep people along all the way through the journey to get them to be really brought into and signing up to the project. We also need to look further at the systems design and integration, so and a fair bit of subsystem testing about that as part of that, as Phil mentioned, so bringing in the University of Salford as a project partner, but also the supply chain partners of Kenza and Urban Chain as well. And then looking further around the DNO DSO integration, what do we need to do to sort of standardise our approach across DNOs for this, but also maximise the benefits of flexibility that this could bring to the network, and make sure that all customers are benefiting from this. So we've got the least cost solution going in, and it's having the greatest impact on the network. And then we'll be looking at learning and scalability. So there's quite a few projects out there at the moment looking at decarbonisation of heat in an urban, as well, in sort of household setting. They're working with UK PN as a new partner to look at what we can learn from other similar projects, but also how we can scale it, because the point of this is to develop a solution that can be rolled out and delivered hopefully at pace, because as we all know, the earlier we save carbon, the more value that has, and the better it will be for all of us. So yeah, how can we roll out and scale it up? And I think that's it from us. But we can take questions, and I think Kate from Rosendale Energy is also here to field any questions about that.
Great. So we have a question here for Phil. How big do you expect the ambient loop clusters to be? Tens of houses, hundreds?
Well, in a way, it's actually both, because we're targeting hundreds of homes, but we can connect street by street, which is tens of homes. So the scale of the overall deployment for each cluster is hundreds of homes.
Cool. Another question here. Is the spatial planning not just the next branding of local area energy planning? They're asking when it's going to be operationalized in this way.
I can answer that. We do a lot of local area energy planning as well. It is different. It's very complementary. So ideally, local area energy planning should be looking at quite a wide regional perspective in terms of what the possible and right solutions are for deployment. But that planning process needs to be complemented by very granular on the ground, as it were, planning, and the methodology we have combined that in. So you're looking at LV network, you're integrating direct consumer engagement, you're looking at buildings. We haven't mentioned the whole process here because it's a snapshot, but we are incorporating building survey data into this as well to get better benchmarking and performance data. That's not done under local area energy planning. We are looking at street works and infrastructure planning. Again, that's not done under local area energy planning, but there's no reason why these two planning processes can't work in conjunction with each other to one inform the other. So again, that's part of what we're looking at.
Thanks. Question here. Have you considered solar thermal or PVT to feed into the GSHP 3 to 4 times more efficient than in heating water than PV? Quite technical question there.
We looked at that under a previous study for this scheme, and we came up with the evaluation that actually, with the efficiency of the groundwater scheme in conjunction with the rooftop generation, that was the best fit. If you didn't have the groundwater scheme, or you were looking to feed more heat into the ground perhaps and create larger heat sources, then you could try and leverage more thermal. But what you're trying to do is really get the case for the ground source to stack up. And then we supplement that with base load and powering the heat pumps themselves as the primary user of the energy.
Great. I don't believe we have any more questions. I'll leave it another couple of moments and we'll see if any more come through. So we are running quite ahead of schedule. We're due for a break now before we come back. So if there is no further questions, we'll see everyone back at 10 past. But if the team from EV Respond is on, we will dive into the next presentation. Is everyone from EV Respond here? Is everyone back firstly?
Yes.
Hi, yeah.
Great. Okay then, well, over to National Grid.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. My name is Lisa Troszka. I'm an innovation engineer for National Grid Electricity Distribution. So for the next 10 minutes or so, myself and colleagues from Centre for Energy Equality and Region will talk you through what we've done as part of our EV Responsive project and our thinking about future steps as well. Next slide, please. So quickly on the agenda, so I'll quickly run through the problem and user needs for EV Respond and specifically opportunity it provides, and then Andy from CAE will explain what exactly we've delivered as part of the discovery phase. And then Bruce from Region talk you through the technology roadmap and key learnings and benefits on the basis of CBA that they've completed. And we'll finish off with a summary of the outcomes and next steps as well. If we could move on further. Thank you. So the idea behind EV Respond is what we're thinking would be interesting to test the concept of using community-owned EVs during the power outages, especially in the scenario when there is a large-scale outage, so that the any organization or individual who owns the EV could respond to our customers directly. And that come about when we kind of appreciate that electricity is vital for health and well-being of all of our customers, but specifically for our vulnerable customers who are medically dependent on reliable supply from ourselves. And the process and existing processes and measures currently is that we, as a DNO, deploy diesel generators to restore supply for our customers. But with the current approach, it's expensive, it's noisy, and emits quite a lot of carbon into the atmosphere, and also it divert our operational staff from actually addressing the root cause, because we need to go to customers' home and connect the diesel generator to the house. So if we could move to the next slide. Yeah, thank you. So there is a challenge that we're hoping to address with EV Respond, and raising awareness that EVs is not just a means of transportation, and it can be used as a mobile power restoration source. It could be used to reduce carbon emissions from the atmosphere as well, if we are capable of replacing some of the diesel generation deployment with EVs, and also increase network resilience. Yes, so if we could move to the next slide, please. So again, just to reiterate, so what EV Respond is aiming to do is to we as DNO ensure reliable and uninterrupted power supply for our customers, and specifically for those customers who are medically dependent on the undisrupted power supply, also, we allow our operational staff to dedicate more time to actually fixing the fault as opposed to attending to people's homes. And with the EV Respond, what we're hoping to be able to do is to address our sustainability goals and commitments, and ultimately reduce carbon emissions through the elimination of the use of diesel generators. Next slide, please. And again, just touching on the fact that if EV Respond is proven to be successful, we're hoping that it will be a good use case to highlight that it could be used not just a means of transportation, but as a mobile power source, and which could potentially drive the wider adoption of EVs and adoption EVs as an EV Response solution. And again, it will reduce carbon emissions in some ways as a replacement to diesel generators during the power outages, and potentially could be added on as an innovative measure for wider network resilience. And I think I'm handing over to you, Andy, now.
Yeah, thanks, Lisa. So this is the approach that we took during the discovery phase to the challenge that Lisa's just outlined. So first of all, we conducted in-depth consumer research to understand both from the respondee, so the people who the service would be provided to, and the people who would be interested in providing the service, what the benefits might be and where those challenges might be as well. So I'll come on to a bit more detail on that shortly. And then we looked into the technology side of things. So that is all the different vehicle to everything, or V2X for short, ways that EV Respond could work. We also looked into how the software side of things would be integrated, because there needs to be an interface between the responders, the respondees, and the networks, before bringing all that together into final reporting, synthesis, and whether it works from a cost perspective. Next slide, please. So the first, so as I mentioned, the first work package was consumer stakeholder research. So we conducted initially a couple of panel sessions with people who this service would be provided to. So that is specifically looking at people with chronic health conditions and people who are particularly vulnerable during power cuts. And a couple of the key insights that we gained were that people would prefer the service to be provided either by somebody who they know personally, or by a reputable organisation who they could trust, such as a DNO or a larger organisation, when compared to having people they don't know with no form of identification turning up. We found that a lot of people, even if they are potentially critically vulnerable to power cuts, don't have their own personal backup equipment in their homes. So the service could be really useful for those people. And we also found that concerns around the concept of power cuts, even though the network is incredibly reliable, does cause a lot of anxiety, particularly because of things, recent storms and concerns over energy security. We also engaged with a wide group of stakeholders, including our partners, West Midlands Combined Authority, and tested a trial case in an area in and around the Midlands, which is part of West Midlands Combined Authority's Net Zero Neighbourhoods programme, and that is one of the areas that we would look to continue to investigate if this project moved forward into a trial. We spoke to lots of experts relevant to the project, so the different charger manufacturers such as Indra and Wallbox, fleet specialists and fleet owners, as well as individual EV owners, to understand whether the technology was going to be available in the short and near term to help with some of our later shortlisting activities. We also spoke to stakeholders who were well up to speed in all the technical, regulatory and safety challenges that this proposition could pose, and how the solution might be incentivised moving forward. And finally, we conducted a literature review looking at different challenges around power cuts, power outages globally, and took some learning from recent past events such as the tsunami in Japan and recent storms in Texas and cold weather stints. And yeah, we also looked at other services such as the other services provided through Priority Service Register and how this could be incorporated, and also found that there could potentially be a range of benefits over and above other solutions available during power cuts, such as the diesel generators that Lisa talked about. Next slide, please. So yeah, we considered a range of different technical options to the solution, and some of these are on the screen here. So we looked at vehicle to load options. So this is where we would be looking to connect bidirectional charging capability from an EV either directly to a load such as a dialysis machine or another piece of machinery that's important for somebody with a medical dependency. We also looked at different vehicle to home, so different options that would resupply the whole home during the power cut. So one of those was a sort of interim approach where a small transformer inverter unit would be connected in the same way as a diesel generator is connected currently to the home. We also looked, I think, further in the future when people have on-house home charging systems that can act as a whole home resupply system. This technology is emerging at the moment and being trialled in the UK, and how that could be beneficial. We also looked at how larger vehicles could resupply either whole buildings or whole streets as well. So that's vehicles with much larger capacity, electrical capacity to deliver the services. Next slide, please. We also looked into how the software and how the whole system would be integrated, both from the customer or the people being responded to's perspective, the responder's perspective, and also the perspective of the distribution network operator, and created a series of mock-ups and an explanation about how this would fit into existing DNO and National Grid electricity distribution processes. Customer services processes, and we spoke to customer service representatives and call centre managers, and how this could integrate within current Priority Service Register services. So you can see some of those mock-ups on the screen here. Next slide, please. Yeah, and then once we've done this research, we looked at all the different solutions from a cost and practicality perspective, and down selected several solutions with one primary solution to take to the next phase of the project as we progress to the alpha phase. So the solution that has the most short-term and most benefit in the short term was the vehicle to load solution. And this is the solution that we're recommending as the primary one to take forward, because the technology is available immediately in many vehicles and could provide very short-term benefits to customers, and has the highest potential right now to deliver that social return on investment that's really important and can potentially really help people through difficult circumstances. We're also proposing to continue research into the two right-hand side solutions. So this is the two vehicle to home type solutions. Because they both have future potential, they have potential to supply the whole home, of course, which is really, really important. But we did discover that right now, the solution might be more difficult in the short term. The technology isn't widespread, but certainly worth bearing in mind for the future. Next slide, please. And that's over to Bruce.
Right. Thanks, Andy. Yeah, so as Andy mentioned, we'd taken a kind of wide view of the potential applications for EV Respond. And so to do this, we looked at the kind of projections for bidirectional charging in EVs and as a technology concept. So what we found was there's quite a lot of alignment in government and industry around its progression. We've had some recent publications like the Smart Charging Action Plan, which have the government consulting with industry, going out to seek views on what they think are the key barriers and timeframes where these might be removed. And key dates which popped up were 2025 to 2030 as kind of these points where barriers to vehicle to home could be removed. We start to see more widespread adoption of vehicle to X. We also looked at the plans of automobile manufacturers. So noticed that there's a growing trend for them to state they'll develop home energy management systems. So kind of ring fencing the use of their battery in wider applications. So that's another indicator that use of the EV battery for these purposes, bidirectional purposes, is where the market is going. And so we did, as we said, look at these wider applications of EV Respond beyond what's possible now. So next slide, please. So again, I'll start with the vehicle to load trial. So technology is available now. There are EVs on the market which have bidirectional charging V2L capability. And we assess this vehicle to load providing temporary resupply versus a counterfactual where a diesel generator is used. And we calculated that a 4.56 million annual benefit could be gained. From 2025, we assumed a vehicle to home trial might be possible, and an 8 million annual benefit could be gained. And then post 2030, we also, in both those cases before, we were looking at societal impacts as well. So the impact of the customer minutes lost incentive and also the reduced emissions from the use of EV Respond. But post 2030, when we assumed a larger pool of customers being responded to by EV Respond versus the counterfactual, we start to see more significant societal impacts. So that's both a result, well, mainly a result of the direct customer minutes lost impact. So if we're providing temporary resupply to more customers than in the counterfactual, in return for, say, a future incentive payment on CML performance, there's a way to deliver that societal benefit while making it viable for the DNO. So, but that's like more blue sky thinking. But for the next phase of the project, we wanted to focus in again on that vehicle to load trial. As Andy said, technology is available now, and the use cases are more obvious now. Vulnerable customers in severe weather events, where there's like Storm Arwen, Storm Eunice, where there's been a call for greater performance in response. So I believe that's all from me.
Yeah, so summary of the outcomes from the work packages during discovery is that the technology roadmap supports the viability and highlights cost benefits and social benefits of EV respond compared with the counterfactual. The trials are feasible in the short term and could have rapid growth potential into other areas over time, including multiple technologies. The work we did on stakeholder engagement provides insights into some of the challenges, policy and regulatory barriers and opportunities as well, which need further investigation. There's a clear cost benefit associated with this methodology for power resupply compared to other alternatives, and there's a huge range of societal benefits beyond just short-term concepts that can provide the immediate benefits that are really worth exploring into the future, because this project could both help people immediately and also help the whole industry in the medium to long term. Next slide.
Yeah, so as Andy Bruce mentioned, we identified that the vehicle to load is the immediate way forward for us. So the current thinking is we're hoping to design a vehicle to load trial, which would be scalable and could be easily shared with other DNOs. As was mentioned, we're talking with West Midlands Combined Authority through their ongoing activities such as Net Zero neighbourhood initiatives, and also the organisation, the likes of Motability, quite interested in the EV response solution. As Andy mentioned, it's quite important to make sure that the technology worked as it intended to do. It's not harming anyone. So as part of the trial, we're hoping that the design that we come up with will be trialed in a controlled environment so that we could ensure that it's safe and viable in the later stages where DNO is not directly involved. To ensure that we actually have EVs that are willing to respond, one of the activities that we would need to perform is to understand what would be the optimum fleet, so that we could recruit as part of EV respond, and also we need to quite clearly map the benefits and the ownership and how this solution may work widely. And as Andy mentioned as well, just to understand the wider benefit case for the EV respond when vehicle to home will become viable, and engage the industry wider for standardization purposes as well. To allow a robust interaction between EV responders and the customers, again, we'll need to work more on those software mockups that Andy showed before. So the prototype EV response software would need to be developed further, where the responsibilities and the interfaces need to be nailed down, how it would work going forward. And then as part of the project, we have identified there are a few technical, regulatory and potential safety challenges with the EV vehicle to load and vehicle to home solutions. So that needs to be looked into in further detail. And also we need to make sure that we understand what commercial arrangements needs to be in place and documented, so all the parties involved in the EV respond are happy with the process. Next slide, please.
Yeah, and this final slide was related to the wider project benefits. So not just being able to help people in vulnerable circumstances in the immediate short term, by continuing to research in this area, including in relation to EV respond, we think that it can really bring on and stimulate the vehicle to everything technologies across the whole energy system. So whether that being as resupply or storage or transport of energy from renewable generation through to resupplying whole streets, whole substations, and then some of the other technologies that we talked about. By starting this journey, it can really help stimulate the market for vehicle to X. I think that's the end of the presentation. Thank you very much.
Great, we've got some time for some questions. First question, how is this project significantly different to Northern Power Grid's Silent Power project? I'm not sure if you're aware of that project. Isn't it just prioritising those on the PSR for this solution?
Yeah, thank you. So we spoke with Northern Power Grid and also in the literature review we conducted, we looked at the Silent Power project. So there's a key difference between the two projects. So the Silent Power project is looking at and I'm sure there's people from Northern Power Grid on here who could comment better than I, but it's looking at a vehicle specifically designed to help people during power cuts, and this is a battery of quite a large capacity, whereas what we're looking at in EV Respond is to create a community response methodology that uses existing electric vehicles that already exist. So whether they are owned by fleet operators or individuals. So that's the key difference there, and both have advantages. And one thing that we would, if we progress to the alpha stage, is work together with Northern Power Grid and also in relation to other power resupply solutions to make sure it's a holistic solution and that each solution is used in the most appropriate case.
Andrew, another question here, can V2L supply power to multiple devices for vulnerable customers? For example, if they have medical equipment and have switched to a heat pump?
Yeah, I'll cover that one. So we looked at the vehicle to load capability of models currently on the market and ones due to come to market, and also the demands for medical equipment. And a few vehicles out now have a 3.6 kilowatt output, so they can service quite a lot of the medical equipment that's currently being used in homes quite comfortably. A heat pump is obviously more of a demand, but there are models coming to market, say more vans, which have up to 9 kilowatts in vehicle to load capability. So it's dependent on the use case, but in general, EVs will have enough power to service multiple devices.
Yeah. Question here, would the EV Respond be available to off-grid systems?
Yes, yes, very much so. So the use cases overseas, particularly in America, there's a couple of vehicles that are being actually marketed specifically to off-grid homes, and in terms of the immediate response methodology which we're developing is would work for any home in terms of resupplying individual pieces of equipment or multiple pieces of equipment, but it could in the future be used as a backup supply for homes that aren't connected to the grid directly.
Would a fleet or domestic EV have to be moved and plugged into a charge point connected to the target property, or could power be provided by a swarm of local EVs along a feeder?
So there's two methodologies that we've been looking at, and the primary one that we're trialing at the moment is the vehicle to load methodology. And the idea there is that if there's a power outage that is affecting a small area, we'd prioritize the properties with the most vulnerable people in those properties. And then, as you say, a swarm, a small swarm of EVs, either operated by a fleet operator or via or individuals would turn up and plug directly into the critical loads for those properties, and they don't need to have a charger pre-installed or locally. Whereas for the whole home solution, one of the methodologies, and I suppose the ideal in the future methodology, is that homes would have a vehicle to home charger, and there are technical challenges associated with disconnecting from the grid there, already installed at the home, and you could just plug the car straight into the vehicle to home charger, and that resupplies the whole house. Which is, it's great, but there are challenges around that at the moment. I hope that answers the question.
Cool. So you briefly touched on regulatory challenges earlier. What are some of the regulatory challenges you're facing that you spoke about, and could you provide an example?
I can.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I mean,
I was going to mention the islanding mode around EV supply equipment. So DNOs currently don't have standard practice or approach to the technical regulations around having an EV and its EV supply equipment provide a vehicle to home capability and cut it, islanding itself from the grid in the meantime, because there's a requirement to do this because any operators working on the grid need to be protected from the supply of the EV. So there's technical regulations which need to be worked through, which is explained in more and better detail in the reports.
Yeah, specifically, it's currently vehicle to home. It would not be G99 compliant, so we would have to remove the entire charging point before using the EVs for resupply. I guess one of the example of, I don't know whether it could be called a challenge, but vehicle to load is not currently would be counted toward restoration. So even though DNOs will be trying to do their best to support the most vulnerable customers, will still be penalized. So it's more of a kind of discussion piece around, would that be would that need to be kind of reconsidered if we're talking about very large scale storm type events? Would that be beneficial for both customers and DNO to see whether the vehicle to load would be clustered as some part of the restoration, or somewhat different to current procedures?
Great. I think that's pretty much the end of our questions. Rob has asked if it's possible to get a copy of the report, but I'll leave you to answer that. So we'll finish up there. Thank you very much. It was a really comprehensive presentation, and we will move along now to Guidelight.
Hi everyone, my name's Elizabeth and I'm the Research Project Manager at Centre for Sustainable Energy. I've got Annette on the line, who is Senior Analyst on the project, who will also be presenting from CSE. And we should also have Sabani here from UK Power Networks, who will be online to assist with any questions. And we should also have Ben from the University of Southampton as well. So thanks for listening to our presentation on Guidelight today. If you could go to the next slide, please. Okay, so this is what we'll be discussing today. So firstly, an overview of the problem context and the research challenge and approach for Guidelight. Then give a brief overview of the project activities and Guidelight stakeholder engagement. We'll then discuss the findings in relation to problem identification, and then we'll discuss what's next for Alpha. If you could go to the next slide, please. So firstly, the problem context. Local authority retrofit programs are rapidly installing low carbon technologies such as heat pumps and solar panels in low income and vulnerable households. Unfortunately, these households are less likely to switch to innovative tariffs or use digital tools to optimize their low carbon technology use. And research has shown that this is due to factors such as low energy literacy, digital exclusion, financial constraints, as well as non-inclusive product and service design. Unfortunately, without support and guidance to become smart energy users, low-income and vulnerable households may struggle to participate effectively in the energy transition. So, for example, if they're not supported to switch to a tariff which meets the flexibility of newly installed low-carbon technologies, if they cannot shift consumption to avoid peak costs, if they don't know how to get the most out of their low-carbon technologies, for instance, by flexibly shifting their energy behaviours to get the most out of their solar panels during the day, or by exporting electricity back to the grid. And this might result in adding to network constraints. For instance, extra network reinforcement might be required to meet increased electricity demand of low carbon technologies. If you could go to the next slide, please. Thank you. So additionally, rich data on households' understanding and use of low carbon technologies is minimal. Therefore, it can be quite hard to know whether low carbon technologies are performing as engineered as a result of the consumer interaction with the installed technologies. And this means that it can be quite challenging to measure the performance of low carbon technologies. And basically, when low carbon technologies don't perform as expected, this can be a result of both social and technical factors, which is known as the socio-technical performance gap. So Guidelight aims to address these challenges in 3 different ways. Firstly, through social research to understand the specific experiences and expectations of households into the technologies being installed in their homes. Also, we've been looking at approaches to low carbon technology data monitoring and technical performance. And we've also been looking into the identification of support interventions to support the uptake of low carbon technologies in low income and vulnerable homes. Next slide, please. So what did we do during discovery phase? So Guidelight's discovery phase was delivered through 4 separate work packages, which ran in parallel across the duration of the project. These focused on a literature review of the social research methods, a technical review of the data monitoring approaches, and also defining the interventions. We also conducted a substantial amount of stakeholder engagement across the discovery phase, including with our project partners who are listed in the bottom right-hand corner there. Our methods included developing a stakeholder map to identify the key stakeholders involved, including academics, energy advice agencies, installers, housing associations, and voluntary and community groups. We also conducted a survey on interventions, which was responded to by 30 people. We held 2 stakeholder workshops, including one with project partners and additional representatives from local energy and advice organisations, and another with CSE's retrofit professionals. We organised 4 local authority calls with our project partners and additional local authority. And we evaluated client feedback from 14 HUGs monitoring and evaluation calls to understand client experiences of installed energy efficiency measures. If you could go to the next slide, please. Thanks. So moving on to the findings, as Guidelight's discovery phase focused on defining the problem the project is trying to solve and also the value in trying to solve it, the intent of our research was also to establish the challenges inhibiting the uptake of low carbon technologies in low income and vulnerable homes. So through our stakeholder engagement and literature review, we've now been able to move from anecdotal evidence to create a clear list of the challenges associated with low income and vulnerable households' uptake of low carbon technologies. These are lack of coherent messaging, mistrust of grant schemes, unfamiliarity with low carbon technologies, insufficient information provision, lack of consideration of vulnerabilities, and insufficient post-installation support and monitoring. So by understanding these, this has given us a robust grounding to proceed to alpha phase with an empirical basis for understanding the social factors which inhibit uptake and adoption of LCTs. If you could move to the next slide, please. Thank you. So the University of Southampton conducted desk-based research to explore the technical landscape for low carbon technology performance monitoring and the socio-technical performance gap. And Ben should hopefully be online to answer any further questions that you might have during the Q&A on this aspect of our research. So based on their research, they uncovered a need for innovating the technical monitoring of low carbon technologies. This includes simple visualizations of low carbon technology performance, additional sensors for studying energy consumption and the indoor environment, simplified warnings for suboptimal performance or technology failure, smart and interactive real-time advice protocols to help users improve the system settings or adapt their own practices, and also backup provisions for missing data and system failures. So I'm now going to hand over to Annette from CSE, who's going to talk us through the next couple of slides.
Great, thank you, Elizabeth. Can you move to the next slide, please? Thank you. So we are proposing to develop an open access toolkit of social interventions that are targeted at those responsible for the delivery of grant-funded schemes to help them to support low-income and vulnerable households. So this might be local authorities, other registered social housing providers, installers, energy advice organisations, amongst others. In the toolkit, there will be materials that can be used throughout the retrofit process, so from the initial planning and outreach through the installation itself, and then for an extended period of monitoring and engagement once the technology is in place. So we're proposing to create materials that can support, firstly, the identification of relevant vulnerabilities early on in the project, so training slides, checklists for use by local authority staff and others involved in the retrofit process. And then because we found that the quality of information documents that are provided to households that have had measures installed under these publicly funded schemes isn't always of the same quality as those targeted to able to pay customers. So we will be drafting a set of written materials that can be downloadable and printable. And we'll also be looking at producing other types of engagement tools like videos, training slides, guidance for running community energy champion schemes, for example. This information that's provided in written format alone is unlikely to reach the broadest possible audience effectively. So we know that the idea of creating an engagement toolkit isn't necessarily particularly innovative in itself. We know that there are some great existing tools out there already that aim to tackle issues that are related to retrofit or to methods of engagement for harder to reach customers. So ours will be specifically targeted for use on projects where low carbon technologies are being installed, rather than trying to tackle the broader retrofit works, although we do appreciate that they're often installed as part of a wider package of measures. We're also planning to build on rather than to reproduce what's already out there, so we can signpost to existing materials in the toolkit rather than reinventing the wheel. And so the innovation in this part of our project really comes in, firstly, with the co-creation of the materials with end users, which Elizabeth will go into in a bit more detail in a minute. Secondly, with the design of the materials to target those vulnerabilities that specifically relate to 5 smart energy capability clusters that were identified through our Smart and Fair research programme. And also finally, with the measurement of the impact of their use on the socio-technical performance gap. And then alongside our toolkit, we will also be drafting a set of policy recommendations, and these will be aimed at creating the conditions needed for social measures such as those included in the toolkit to be considered as more viable and deliverable. So really, these would be aimed at promoting recognition of the value of social interventions in supporting the realisation of the full range and extent of the anticipated benefits from these kind of projects, and also considering how they can be best incorporated into scheme design. So next slide, please. Thanks. So we've already, I think, alluded to some of this, but this is what we'll be trying to achieve during the next phase of the project. So firstly, we'd be looking to pilot hard technical and social measures for measuring the performance gap, which we would then want to roll out during beta phase for a much longer time frame. And we'll also be looking at how we can measure the impact of the social measures set out in our toolkit. Secondly, we will be working on the co-creation of our resources or our interventions. And then thirdly, we'd be further developing the design of the research for beta phase, at which point I will pass back to Elizabeth.
Thanks, Annette. If you're able to move to the next slide. Brilliant, thank you. Okay, so through discovery phase, we identified the need for an innovative participatory social research approach with a clear focus on user-centered design. In particular, social research methods are needed to understand how users interact with LCTs as a result of various socio-cultural factors, such as beliefs, expectations, and everyday habits. So during discovery phase, we designed a full-scale participatory social research approach, which we intend to develop and pilot in alpha phase. This approach, which you can see on the screen, intends to employ fully co-creative approaches to design both the social research methods needed to understand the everyday practices and experiences of households engaging in the low carbon technology retrofit process, and also the social interventions to support uptake of low carbon technologies and reduce the socio-technical performance gap. So we will then be able to identify through this approach the most appropriate social research methods for capturing useful insights and design effective user-centered interventions for the beta phase. And I'll now hand back to Annette to summarise and conclude.
Okay, can you move the next slide, please? Great. So the main benefits that we're trying to achieve through Guidelight, the reasons that we want to do the project and we think it's important, are summarised here. So we want to support greater uptake of more accessible smart technologies and products within the market, with a specific focus on making sure that low-income and vulnerable households are not left behind in the transition to a smarter energy system, and also that they're able to access the full extent of potential consumer benefits from lower bills, more comfortable homes, due to more efficient use of the installed technologies, to improved access to lower tariffs and other smart energy offers. We want to provide evidence to support the design of relevant policies and support mechanisms, and we want to demonstrate that social interventions can be an affordable, reproducible, scalable solution to improving retrofit outcomes under the right conditions. And then we also want to demonstrate that there are also benefits to network operators in terms of providing greater predictability across networks, greater ability to shift demand and reduce peak loads, as well as enabling them to support the people on the end of the wires a bit better. So can you move to the last slide, please? Okay, so this is just the final slide to reiterate the core purpose of the project, and how we would intend to build on the work that we've carried out in this discovery phase, take it through to alpha and beta phases as hopefully a tangible and we think impactful research project. So I think that's it. If there are any questions.
Right, there is a question here. Do you anticipate that novel, i.e. longer term or low interest financing mechanisms would be able to unlock investment in low carbon technologies for lower income communities, or ultimately is long-term public support going to be needed?
I'll respond to that question. So in the next phase of the project, we are going to explore other like low interest and like longer term financial mechanisms available. We'll try and bring alternate utilities on board, or organizations with alternate utilities, see what are the available funding mechanisms available, and if we can work together rather than working in silos to be able to meet the needs of city uptake and more for vulnerable customers.
Great. I think that is the last of the questions. Okay, no more questions. All right, well, thank you very much. Oh, there's one more that's come through. How do you envisage being able to influence government policy down the line? What might that look like?
That's a tricky question, but yes, I think during like Annette stated in one of the slides, we are definitely looking to provide some sort of policy recommendations to influence the government policy. What it might look like in response to that, so we did have we have identified various interventions, one of them being like supply chain issues. One of the challenges has been retrofit granted funds are of shorter duration, and hence the job is not completed to the satisfaction. So is there something we can do beyond it? Can we increase the schedule time, or and the second part of our project is our monitoring approaches. So can we include the installation of the monitoring devices as a package in the retrofit installation? So these are the certain options we will explore more during the alpha phases and find out how that is going to influence government.
Great, thanks for that answer. Okay, so our final presentation for today is Shield. So we will move on. Great.
Thanks, Ellen.
Over to you.
Can everyone hear me? Yeah, hopefully. Is that yes? Maybe? Yeah. Great. So yeah, thanks everyone, and obviously thank you for the presentations and everyone's patience. So waiting for us at the end. With Shield, I'm Jonathan Gilmore, so I'm the project manager for UK Power Networks for this project and sit in UK Power Networks innovation team. We've got Carol from Essex County Council, Alex from UK Community Works, and John from Power Circle Projects, all of which you'll hear later during this presentation. Please could we go to the next slide, please? Thank you. Yeah, so the agenda today, obviously very similar to the agendas for the other presentations as well. So it's the problem that Shield aims to solve, an overview of the project, the key activities that we did in discovery phase, the user needs and stakeholder engagement, solution and findings, benefits, and then looking more forward onto alpha and beta phase. So yeah, I'll start with the next slide, please, on the problem. Thank you. Great. So yeah, the real problem around here is around actually the approach to decarbonising heat and energy in consumers' homes, in particular vulnerable low-income households and social housing. And that's mostly due to its high upfront costs and high running costs. So, you know, a lot of our counterfactuals is looking at, you know, what's the current way that we can decarbonise heating and energy, things like heat pumps or other methods. But actually at the moment, even with policy, even with, you know, incentives, actually it still remains quite inaccessible for vulnerable and low income households. So really this, you know, new approaches, technologies, business models are needed to, you know, make it accessible, affordable, that benefits, I guess, all of the users within the industry, whether that's technology, whether that's sort of local councils, whether that's social housing, the end consumer. So yeah, really looking at a way to try and solve the problem holistically. Next slide, please. Thank you. So yeah, the overview. So I guess following really on from that problem statement is actually, you know, how can we find ways to solve that problem? And what we're looking at here is different pathways to decarbonise heat and energy, looking specifically at social housing. One of the key partners we've got is Eastlight Community Homes, and we're really using them and their residents and tenants that will be the sort of users of this technology in the sort of pilots and the initial scaling and beta phase. But Shield's looking at replacing those existing heating solutions, looking at, you know, gas boilers, oil LPG boilers with innovative, low cost, low carbon heating. And we've got a new technology, which is Thermify's technology, which is distributed data centers, which provide low cost heat and low cost energy and low carbon heating. Essentially, it's the the waste heat that you would have from operating in a distributed data center, and really using this new technology as a way in conjunction with sort of energy generation storage, whether that's solar PV, battery storage, heat storage, that's going to help balance that demand and supply and reduce those costs, so that what you should have is a system that's affordable and low carbon. So yeah, I think as I put here, yeah, we're looking at those different combinations of technologies. So in discovery phase, we're looking at, actually, is it just the distributed data center plus PV? Is it plus PV and storage plus rooftop wind? Is it plus ground source heat pumps? So actually, it's really, what's the right pathway? What's the right technology mix? And then looking at the smart energy management side. So actually, how do we incentivize flexibility? How do we provide those services to the grid so that it lowers that cost of operating? And then really taking a human-centered approach. So what I really mean by this is, you'll see probably from the next slide when I hand over to Carol, is we've tried to include everyone and really do this from the ground up or bottom up. So tailoring engagement, identifying the best engagement methods, the best types of customers, who's really going to be able to uptake this technology, and trying to make sure that it works for the people that are going to be using it. So yeah, it's a bit of a high-level overview, but I'll hand over for this next slide to Carol.
Thanks very much, Jonathan. And if we can have that next slide, please. Thank you very much. And just in case anyone was curious, SHIELD, and we do love our acronym, I have to say, stands for Smart Heating and Intelligent Energy in Low Income Districts. So we have a range of delivery partners, as all of the projects have had, that have spoken this afternoon. And I have to say, it has been absolutely fascinating listening to everybody else's activities. But we do have a range of partners who kind of represent the various different interests within this particular agenda. So we have Thermify and Kensa, who are our technologists. We have Citizens Advice Essex, who fairly obviously have a very strong remit, particularly around the cost of living crisis and helping vulnerable households in general. As Jonathan's already mentioned, we have Eastlight Community Homes, who are offering their housing as a kind of a first use case model for the kind of technology interventions that we're talking about. We have UK Community Works, who are going to be speaking in a couple of slides' time, experts in stakeholder engagement. And we have Power Circle Projects, who are pretty much experts in absolutely everything, including technology modelling and business modelling as well, because obviously all of this has to add up from a pound, shillings and pence perspective. UK Power Networks as our lead organisation, and Essex County Council, and we're kind of providing the geographical canvas, as it were, that we're testing this particular set of ideas out on. Like every other project that's spoken this afternoon, our aim is for everything to be replicable, and I think there's often quite a common misperception that Essex is quite an affluent county. It certainly is in places, but we also host the most deprived wards in England. So it's not all about Towie, unfortunately. So Essex is a pretty diverse county, and if we can make it work there, we're hoping through replicability we can make this work in quite a lot of circumstances. Next slide, please. Thank you very much. So just to give you a broad breakdown of our work packages, obviously we have a project management work package, keeping everybody in line. Then we start to delve down into the much more interesting stuff. So site shortlisting. So we started off with a set of criteria, which enabled us to kind of hone in on the properties that would be the best demonstrators of this technology in this very early stage of exploration. We have stakeholder engagement. Again, we've had an awful lot of discussion around this through other projects this afternoon. That work package falls into a couple of different areas: the engagement itself, and then obviously the analysis of that engagement. We have the development of technical specifications, and the financial and energy modelling that's gone with those specifications. And then, of course, our thoughts of late have very much turned to what the future might hold for us, and preparation for our alpha stage. I'm now going to hand over to, I believe, Alex Templeton of UK Community Works for the next slide. Thank you.
Thanks, Carol. So regarding user needs, really we wanted to learn how concerned the tenants are about the cost of energy and the climate change crisis, and how willing they are to try new technologies and services in response to their concerns. So we surveyed 10,000 tenants and we had nearly 500 responses. And in summary, the tenants are extremely concerned about energy costs and very concerned about climate change. And so following a short description of the technologies and the services that we plan to use, 68% of tenants wanted to try this system in the next 12 months, with another 26% maybe. So only 1 in 20 had no interest, which is very interesting and somewhat surprising given previous concerns that I've noted around reluctance to try new technologies. So we concluded that there is a strong interest in and demand for cost-cutting, low-carbon energy systems in general, and in the Shield system in particular, as we described it. Next slide, please, and over to you, John.
Thank you. So I think the key takeaways before getting into the detail is that Shield does represent a breakthrough in supporting vulnerable and particularly fuel poor households, and indeed in lifting people out of fuel poverty. It's not just talking about parity with gas, it's talking about a 70% reduction against the typical cost of gas heating. And that sounds like it's too good to be true. But as Jonathan said at the outset, and Carol said, I mean, the reason behind this is the economics, that because you're talking about waste heat from a data center process miniaturized so it can be inside the home, the main revenue streams are coming from that data processing task for quite different customers. This is otherwise waste heat, and that's what enables this much lower price point to be provided, and that revolution in lifting people out of fuel poverty. But we wanted to make sure that it was doable and how it would fit into a smart local energy system. So I think just the previous slide we're at just now, if we can. That's gone.
Just one more back or 2 more back, I think.
2 more back.
Yeah.
So for this to be fundable and scalable, to optimize it, it should form part of a smart local energy system. We already have a lot of experience in developing solar PV and battery systems and the business and funding models that can support them. So we weren't working from a blank canvas. We were saying on the basis of that smart local energy system platform, how could Thermify best fit in and optimize operation within that kind of context? What a smart local energy system does is optimize local generation and storage and heat production, and uses for the benefit of tenants, but also uses grid flexibility to manage network constraints and importantly gain new revenue streams from grid services, which helps fund commercial scalability. So what we're looking in homes is to integrate our existing smart local energy system with PV and battery, with the Thermify heat hub system, which is this distributed data center alongside an appropriate heat storage. And we've got several heat storage systems. It depends on the precise space availability and other demands within the home, which heat storage system is optimal. And the smart energy system, which helps manage demand and supply and provide those grid services, and also provide the ability for peer-to-peer trading. So instead of just exporting to a conventional electricity supplier, this can be exporting to other low-income households and gaining higher income than conventional export, but also gaining benefits for those households that don't have this kit inside their home. We have looked at how this could integrate with ground source heat pumps, and our findings from that is that Where there's enough space for the Thermify heat hub unit, then the best value is obtained by the Thermify heat hub unit providing the complete heat solution. However, there are many certain circumstances where they are very highly space constrained, such as many blocks of flats, and in those space constrained circumstances, optimizing ground source heat pump systems with Thermify heat pumps enabling interseasonal storage adds value to the ground source heat pump solution. We've been looking at innovative rooftop wind. We've been against rooftop wind as power circle for the last 12 years because of noise and vibration issues. We have 3 technologies, one at domestic scale, which through partners we believe can address those noise and vibration issues. But the domestic scale solution isn't quite at the stage to be able to have prototyping, so to have demonstration in people's homes during alpha stage. We are hoping to provide demonstration in people's homes at demonstration scale during beta stage. So the social ESCO model is key to this because this provides the routes to scalability. It provides something that addresses the barriers to scaling low carbon by addressing the issues of how you develop projects, how you manage and finance projects at scale, and also addressing the ability to help contribute to funding projects through provision of grid services, and also providing particular support to fuel poor and vulnerable households, which I'll come on to. Next slide, please. So one of the things we did was have to look at the stock, around 11,000 Eastlight homes, through discussion with Eastlight community homes, but also with the connections team at UKPN, and knowing our own physical constraints, talking with Thermify, we took a couple of different sieves to come out with around 3,000 homes, from which during alpha stage we can identify the 300 or so homes we're looking for at beta stage. So that gives us a good basis for providing our beta stage cohort. In discussion with the UKPN connections team, we're focusing at their suggestion on the 4 main town areas where initially the connection issues will be best addressed initially. And we are also having in mind to house type. So generally speaking, the easiest starting point is with individual houses with their own individual rooftops. That's not saying that's the only place you can apply the solution, it's just the easiest starting point for the solution. We're also looking at this phase at homes which are EPC C and above. Again, D or below would certainly be able to participate in due course, but we'd probably need in most cases to have some extra fabric measures undertaken prior to this solution coming in. Similarly, we're confining in this process to existing wet systems via large gas heated systems with existing pipework and radiators, also a few oil-fired systems. It will certainly apply to homes with storage heaters, for example, but we would have to put in wet systems, which would add to costs during this pilot stage if we were to have done that. So taking those sets of considerations into account, we've got around 3,000 homes from which to shortlist, and very positively the UKPN connection team have proposed a connect and notify procedure, which is the simplest procedure to adopt, and in most cases they should be able to give a 5 kilowatt export limit. In some cases it may need to be 3.68. So our energy and financial modelling has indicated good scope for commercial scale rollout with substantial savings to tenants, and what we need to do is to be able to have a demonstration project at both initial alpha scale and at larger beta scale to give funding partners the evidence base and confidence to be able to fund very large scale rollouts. There are issues that are regulatorily in relation to the targets set on social landlords. Currently, social landlords have targets that relate to their EPC ratings of their properties, and the Thermify unit, the EPC structure at the moment wasn't invented at the time when Thermify don't take account of Thermify in its solution type. So there is a procedure called Appendix Q, which the Building Research Establishment, through which BRE can establish new technologies into the EPC framework. So that's an important process we'll be progressing in alpha stage in order to be able to reassure the housing association that the properties that have this treatment taken will be at an appropriate EPC rating to be able to meet the targets placed upon them. We are looking at a model for social tenants where the electricity which the Thermify unit uses itself will be paid for directly by Thermify. They won't be having the social tenant be expected to pay and Thermify recompense them. That does raise a new regulatory issue. At the moment, that would require a separate boundary meter, which is perfectly doable, but it would be much simpler to have meter sharing through something like the P379 reform, which is currently on hold. And that's part of the dialogue we want to have with Ofgem during alpha stage. So we have several heat storage options suitable and available. There's one quite exciting new one called QZeta, which provides low-cost, high-capacity, long-duration storage. And we've had several reports recently saying our storage systems in the UK do need more long-duration storage, and this could provide a really exciting means of doing that at a household level. Customer impact, as I've said, on the heat side of what customers pay, we're talking about a 70% reduction from just over £1,000 on the price cap level from July 2023 down to £300 a year. So that's just around over two-thirds reduction. But in terms of the overall heat energy bill, not for a grant-funded process. This is on our current assumptions on a scale-out commercially fundable model around at least 40% reduction in overall home energy costs. Again, that's really a breakthrough solution to lift people out of fuel poverty. There is scope for further reduction in relation to Thermify's pricing policy for those identified as in fuel poverty. I think the key thing is that we've satisfied ourselves that whilst the system itself is complex, it can be made simple for tenants to use, the tenant interface being simple, tenants setting heat and hot water requirements as they would do for a gas boiler, and the optimization system being automated. Tenants don't need to make behavioural changes in order to make big savings. Next slide, please. So, in terms of the consumer, standard heat cost is £300 a year, as I say, about a 70% reduction, and no upfront costs for PV and storage during beta stage itself. We're not expecting Ofgem to pay for that. That would be commercially fundable. We are wanting Ofgem to pay for the Thermify installs at alpha and beta stage because they are brand new, but our aim is that beta will provide sufficient confidence for scale up with commercial funding after beta. Big network avoided costs in terms of network reinforcement. This is what the smart local energy system using the flexibility assets both within the battery system, but also within the heat and heat storage system. And finally, greenhouse gas emissions, large reductions in greenhouse gas emissions. Because this is using waste heat from the data center on independent assessment generates less carbon emissions than a conventional data center. And because the heat is heat that would otherwise be wasted, it's no additional carbon emission to utilize that heat. So on to the next slide, and I think Jonathan for the next slide.
Thanks. Yeah, conscious time, so I'll probably just very quickly go over this one. But for Alpha, we'll be undertaking further tenant engagement, but this time actually, going to tenants' houses, actually speaking to them, engaging with them at a sort of deeper, more detailed level, looking at tenant agreements, and actually trying to shortlist households that for beta that are willing to participate in beta phase. We'll be looking at commercial agreements, funding structure, and energy supply. So, there's going to be some peer-to-peer contract options with Urban Chain, who will be a new partner for Alpha Phase. We'll be looking at that beta sort of funding operating model in a bit more detail than actually what we've got at the moment. So looking at what that beta tenant agreement will be. At the moment, obviously tenants already with Eastlight have an agreement, but we'll need to supplement that with an additional agreement. We'll be looking at technology modeling, so actually, undertaking site surveys, connection assessments, really following on from the work we've done in discovery, but again, taking it to that next level of readiness so that we can actually roll things out for beta. And we'll be looking at an Alpha Phase pilot. So actually, in Alpha Phase, we'll be physically deploying the pilot in 1 or 2 homes, getting that learnings, checking our assumptions, updating and modeling, getting tenant feedback, and testing really all of our hypotheses that we've had in discovery to then inform what we do for beta phase. So I think go to the last slide. And I know probably don't have too much time.
Back to me for that. I'll be very quick. So at beta stage, we're aiming to deploy at a scale sufficient to generate grid services income to really be able to demonstrate to funders the commercial scale-up route that can happen beyond beta. We've got 4 towns within the Eastlight stock where we're proposing to focus, and replicability is key. And I think the key takeaway, we've established this as a breakthrough solution. What we've also established is that it's doable, and what Alpha stage will be able to show us leading through to beta stage is that it's not just doable, but also scalable. And that's, I think, the end of our presentation, and keen to have questions.
Great, we've got some time for just a couple of questions. I've got one here. Are the hubs in each home all part of a network? How much heat can you expect from a boiler size server? Would it need a secondary heat source?
No, it wouldn't need a secondary heat source. It's a 6 kilowatt electrical unit, and the vast majority of that is converted into heat. We actually follow the heat load through the year so that the heat is actually the amount of data processing is having to turn down during the summer because there's too much heat. So there's plenty of heat there on its own to provide the complete heat and hot water solution.
Wonderful. I don't think we have time for any more questions, but they are there if you want to use the last minute or so of the session to answer them, or we can take a screen grab and pass them on. Okay, just next slide, please. So I'd just like to highlight that we have the other show and tell webinars coming up. We also have our ideation sessions coming up, which Chris has just put into the chat here. Please do register. These are being hosted by Carbon Trust, and yeah, we would really like to see you in attendance. But other than that, thanks everyone for your presentations today. It's been a really good session. I know how much work goes into these, so yeah, thank you all, and we hope to see your projects move through to Alpha. Thanks.
Thanks very much.